So today we'll be talking about controls. Controls really are one of my favorite features in Kumu. I use them for every map that I create. I always use them as a recommendation for how to make maps better, just because they allow you to really untangle that complexity in a map. Controls are basically buttons or a drop down that you can add to your map that allows you to dynamically play around with the data. Like I said, it really helps you untangle that complexity because you can look at different layers of your data and you can filter out any noise that is not relevant to you in that specific moment, or maybe go and switch between different views to look at different situations from a different angle. So first of all, anything that I'm going to discuss in this webinar, you can always check the documentation for any specific code or how to do something. I really recommend reading through the controls guide here in the Kumu help docs, docs.kumu.io, and then simply go to the controls dropdown. So there's one guide for just in general, all the controls. And then if you on that little drop-down arrow, you can see a lot of more specific documentation for more specific controls, which I'll go over today. Then another Kumu doc that I always have open is the controls reference. I'll go into why and how you would use this during this webinar as well. But know that this one, even for me, who has been working for Kumu for 5 years, I will still have this controls reference open if I'm creating or adjusting a control in the advanced editor, just because it helps me write some of the code or some of the changes that I might want to incorporate. What's really great about controls is that there's really unlimited flexibility. So in the most basic way, you can simply create a button that filters information in and out, but you can also highly customize controls to show exactly that data that you want the user to see whenever they click on the control. You can decide for yourself what level of complexity or what level of flexibility you want to add to your control. So first, I'll be going into a couple of examples. The first map that I'm going to show you is the Projects in the Wild. Projects in the Wild is basically a collection of all of the Kumu projects that we encountered in the wild, we say, but it's basically a Kumu map that we saw somewhere and we didn't know it existed, but we did find it really important to start gathering all of those because there's just so many incredibly powerful and compelling maps that we want to share with you all as well. What I like about this map is that it's basically a database, right? And it allows you to find a map specifically based on what is relevant to you or what is important to you at that very moment. Here in the top left corner, you see a number of different controls. Then here at the top, you'll see just the buttons. As you can see here, these are drop downs and these are buttons. And then here in the bottom right corner, we also have a toggle control, we call that, but it basically just with a simple click, you can show data or hide data. Some other controls that are built in are the legend. The legend is actually a control. And these buttons that you see here, these are also controls, and the search bar that you see here. So this is just one map that actually has a combination of a lot of different controls that you can have interact and work together to look at the view specifically that you'd like to see. The first one is really easy. It's the project name, so basically a label. And here I can just see all the names of all the different projects that are in this Kumu project. And if I click on any of these, it will basically just highlight that specific map, that project on the map. There are a number of ways to filter this data down. The first one is theme. So if you're looking for a specific theme and you want to see all the maps that are based on that theme, then you can click here and it'll bring you the maps that speak or are about that specific theme. And the same is for sectors or regions. If you want to have a certain region addressed in a map, then you can take a look there. Language, we have a couple of maps in different languages. And Kumu features. So if you're looking for a specific feature and you want a good example of that feature in a map, then you can look here. And also here you'll have like the advanced controls and the cluster controls. So any time after this webinar that you want to look at maps that actually have that control in action, like using it in their map, then you can find them here. And then the last one is a cluster control. Of course, I'll be going into all these different options and what they do later, but this is just an example of how you can use them together. And like I said, this is an on and off toggle to focus only on Kumu projects that actually have presentations. This is really a database where controls make it easier to find the data that you're looking for and that is relevant to you. And then now we're moving into another map where the controls are used just simply to filter down information or to show it in different ways to really highlight different angles of the same data. So this is a map that maps out a lot of rock climbing routes all over the UK. And you see that there's controls in each corner here. So the built-in controls that you would normally see here, like the legend or search or the buttons in the top right corner, they're gone because this person actually just wants you to focus in on this specific data and all the controls that are available. So the first one is the region, simply where is it located? So this is a filter control. Here it's a button, but it also does filtering because you can see the kind of the grade, how difficult the rock climbing route is. So what I really like here is that in the bottom left corner, they're actually using a partial view. So you'll see that if I change this button, it actually changes the colors that I'm looking at, because here I'm coloring by region and here I'm coloring by grade or how difficult the specific route is. And the same thing is done here. So right now we're looking at kind of like a force-directed layout. Kumu decides where to place elements, and the elements are not really, they're just plotted all over the map. But if I click here, I can see a scatter plot, and then you can see the elements being placed based on what pitch it is and what the height of the route is. So it's a different way to show the same information, and I can keep all of that in the same overview. So people just can, with the simple click of a button, can go through all these different options. And then this is a cluster control here. So I can connect all these elements by region, or I can also connect them by crag, or at the same time, region and crag, which usually creates even more interconnected elements. So that's a great way to just have the same data, but with controls, you just constantly flip it and show it from a different angle. Then controls can also be used to look at a system. This is a systems map of a cancer-free economy. And the controls at the top, if you click on them, it focuses on a specific part of the system. So you start with the entire map, and then by clicking on these buttons, it's really goes down deep into the system, and you can maybe focus on this a little bit more. If I just go through all of these, I'm going to zoom out a little bit more. You can see part of the systems. It allows you to step for step untangle. Okay, what is the system? What is basically the starting point or the point that we're focusing on? And then how does it interact with all the other factors in the system? And you can, of course, bring the whole map back. Here, while we're looking at this, in the bottom right corner, this is an image control. So you can also add an image to your map and place it in any of the corners, so that there's always a logo of your company or organization on the map. Then this one is a geo template. And what I like here is that they use something for controls called grouping, which means that you can have different controls, but they're on the same line. And they also added the label at the top so that you can easily see what each control does. So you can say, okay, where do I want to find a member of SGM? And then I can say, okay, based on type of activity or the sector that they work in, or I can even like have these controls interact so that I can really drill down to any of the locations of the members that I'm focusing on with this map, because apart from just having the basic filters and controls and showcases, it also uses a text control in the bottom right corner. And the text in this case invites you to add your own data or add yourself to this map. And it also includes a GDPR statement, which of course for some users in the European Union is important. So this user made sure that the GDPR statement is very clear on the map as soon as you open it by just putting it in a text control in the bottom right corner. So you can also use controls like that. And then lastly, this is a map where you can see changes over time. For example, if I click here, this is Q1, and then in Q2, more data is added, and in Q3, you get the gist. You just go through all of the quarters and how that affected a specific network. And this at the top is called a view toggle, because you're basically looking at different views, but making them all accessible within one main view by adding a view toggle control at the top. And when I talk about partial views, there's a separate webinar that dives more into partial views, but since they're kind of entangled with controls, I do want to explain a little bit how that works. Normally, if you would click here in the view dropdown in the top left corner, you could see all the different views. And views basically highlight data from different angles. And you can use different coloring or different filters for a specific view. But like I said, sometimes you just want to pull that into the main view and then with the use of buttons, go through all those views. So for example, if I look here at the one for Q1, remember that this is what we saw when we pressed the first button. It's created simply by going into the advanced editor and then copying any of the codes that you see here. And once you put that into the main here, there's the first view. You can see the view 2019 Q1, and then you just paste the code in, and then that's the view that you'll see when you click here. I also really like using these specific type of controls to show different views and data decorated in different ways by adding this control to the top of my map. Okay, so those are a couple of the examples that we have. Then first, let me show you how to create a control. If we switch to the basic editor, there's really two ways to add a control, but in the basic editor, basically the easiest because it has this nice UI and you only have to click a couple of buttons, go through a menu, and then the control is created. I would say add custom control. And then the first dropdown allows you to choose what you want the control to do. So the first one is a filter control to filter elements by field. And when you filter, you really show only parts of the map and completely hide the rest of the map. And we've seen it here before that if I click here, it really only shows me those elements on the map and the rest of the map just completely disappears. That's called a filter control. So that's the first option. The second option is to filter connections. So in this case, there are no connections in this specific map, but it basically works the same. It shows some connections while hiding others. The third option is the showcase. In the showcase, instead of completely hiding the rest of the map, it only fades it out. I think that was this one. Yes, definitely. If I click here, you can still see, kind of faintly see the entire map, but it highlights the information that is relevant to me. And sometimes that's just nice, especially if you want to show kind of the interactedness of a whole interconnectedness, yes, of a whole network. Then I like to use showcase. Then the fourth option is to cluster. And when you cluster elements, you connect them based on a common field. So I showed it here earlier. If I click on creator, it shows all of the creators that have made this specific map. And what's really neat is that sometimes there's, for example, Christy Capra, she's a very strong Kumu user. She's created a lot of different maps. And this way you can see that all these elements are connected to Christine. So that is a cluster control. And it really allows you to dynamically adding connections and then take them away again. And then the last one is to focus elements by field. And when you focus elements, it's you focus on a specific piece of information in their profile, so a specific field, and any first degree connections that they have. Again, this map doesn't have a specific example of it, but I can actually, maybe I can use that one as an example in a moment. Once you've chosen what you want to do, what you want the control to do to your map, then you choose the region. So this is straightforward. It's just bottom. Do you want it at the bottom, at the top, top left, top right? One important thing to remember is that if you're putting something in the top right, it currently already has these built-in controls there. So if you click on that you want something in the top right, that actually makes those controls disappear. Now there is a way to bring it back, which I'll go into in a moment. Just know that if ever for any reason your settings button disappears and you feel like I don't know how to bring it back, then it's likely that you've placed the control there and you just need to place it somewhere else. So maybe if you put it at the top, then look, those buttons are right back again. Then by is the field that you want to use for the filtering or the showcasing or the clustering. In this case, the element type, there's only two different ones. And what's really neat is that as I'm going through this menu, I haven't saved anything yet, but I can immediately see on the map what that does. So if I click here, I can see all the projects that were created by the Kumu team, and here are all the projects that were created by the user. And that goes for any of these fields, right? I can just go through any of them, and that will immediately show. Oh, these are a lot of creators. Okay, immediately show what it's going to look like. As is what you aesthetically want the control to look like. So labels are very basic, just the labels, and then the buttons also have kind of like a button visual around it. And the drop downs, I usually use the drop downs if I have more than 5 different options, because I don't want to have this huge list of controls at the top, buttons at the top of my map. I just want to have a drop down and people can scroll through that. Then here you have allow multiple selections, which basically asks me, do I want to allow people to select the multiple options at the same time, or do I just want them to be able to see one at the same time? And a good example of that where I did not allow a multiple selection is the connect by, because if I'm connecting by creators, you're already seeing that there's so much data being added and so many connections on my map right now. So if I were now to also connect by Kumu features, then you can imagine that this would just be a huge hairball of different connections going to different places, and it would be very hard to interpret where all the connections are going, actually increasing the complexity of the map instead of making it easier to digest. So for this specific control, I said, no, if I click on Kumu features, then I automatically want the creator cluster to deactivate so that I'm only focusing on one specific cluster at the same time. As you can see, this one is already super complex just because we have so many Kumu features being featured in all of these maps. And then the last one is a placeholder. So if I'm looking at the dropdown right now, it just mentions the field that I'm filtering or clustering or doing the control by, but I can also change that. So this allows you to give a little bit more guidance to the user or to the viewer what they can do by clicking there. So I could say click here to show / hide the type of map, and that immediately shows here on the map at the top, inviting the viewer to click and know immediately what they're looking at. So that's the most basic option. I actually wanted to see if I can create a focus control so you'll see what that looks like. Kumu feature. So I first need to add in connections, because what I like about focus is that it focuses on certain information, but also shows the first degree connection. So let me look at all the Kumu features, and then I'm going to create a focus control at the top by, it automatically chooses connections type, but there is no connection type, so there's no data there. And then let's say Kumu features, I will want a drop down because this is a lot of buttons, doesn't look good. And then a couple more options just came up just for this specific control. So the first one is out, which basically means, do I want to show first degree connections or also second degree connections? If I change this number, it changes the degree. So how many degrees out from the main element that I'm focusing on. The default is when I am opening my map, do I want to show all of the options or do I want to show nothing? So that you have to click on the focus on a control in order to see data being added to the map. That's usually very nice if you kind of want to build on your data in different ways. But like I said, there's just a lot of flexibility here. And then now let's see if it works in action. If I'm focusing by element shape, then Kumu needs to think for a moment. And now what you can see when I close this again is that you see the element shape is now the main focus, and any of the first degree connections that element shape has, so all of these elements. And if I were to change this to out 2 or out 3, then the map has to think for a little bit, but eventually you'll see that more of the degrees are being added. So I'm going to revert all of this and then show you how to edit and delete any controls that you've created. So usually if I'm creating a control, then it's important to save at the bottom. So normally it says, do I want to save or do I want to revert? Revert basically just takes everything away again, and save obviously saves it so that next time you open the map, the control always shows up. In this case, I want to revert because I want to look at my existing controls. So below the control section and below the add custom control button, you can see all of the existing controls that I already have in the map. And also here you can see their location. So top left, bottom, etc. You can see what type of control it is. So a filter, a showcase, text control. Text control is these nice headings that I have here. And if I want to edit any of these, I can simply click on the edit pencil and I'll see exactly what I've created before, and I can make any changes. And of course, I can also delete it. So deleting it here just takes away the entire control. So that's the most basic way to create controls, just in the basic editor, playing around with it, adding them, taking them away again. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I have a question about, I think I added one control being focus. See, what did I do? Show elements by field. And then I added focus elements by field. And I think it negated the showcase. Are there any controls that kind of take out the other one once you use it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great question. So you were trying to use two different controls at the same time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So when you're using multiple controls at the same time, especially with the filter control, any of the information that you're trying to filter by or showcase or focus, it needs to be on the map already. So if you have one control that filters out information, but another control that basically needs that information to be able to show that specific view, then it won't work. For example, if you have two different filter controls, then they work with what we call AND logic. So what you're going to see on the map is going to adhere to all of the rules that you set. So AND filter 1 will apply, and filter 2 will apply. One different way to go about that is to actually use a showcase control. Remember that showcase does the highlighting and the fading, and the filtering does the hiding and the showing.
Yeah.
And the difference with the showcase control is that it goes with OR logic. So it'll adhere to one or the other, or at least one of the rules that you've set. So usually just switching your filter control to a showcase control and then combining it with your focus control, that will actually show what you want it to show.
Great. That makes sense. Thank you.
If after this you're trying that and it still doesn't work out, just send me a DM on Slack, and I'm happy to look at your specific case. But usually this kind of solves it already. So usually when I talk about the advanced editor, people get a little bit scared or overwhelmed, especially if you're not familiar with coding or how that works in Kumu. Like I said, if you don't want to work in the advanced editor, you really don't have to. You can just stick to the basic editor, create your control, and it'll probably work in the way that you want it. However, the advanced editor allows for a lot more customization and a lot more flexibility. So I do want to really go over it because it creates even better controls and allows you to do so much more with your map. So the control options that I showed you before was filter, showcase, cluster, and focus. All those things can be done in the basic editor. Now, if we're looking at controls in the advanced editor, there's actually a lot more controls that are now available. So the first one is a color legend. It's a legend was created automatically, but you can really customize your entire legend. So you can create it with code, and I'm not going to show you how to do that exactly, but I'm going to show you where to find that information, because it's really just a copy pasting of the code that you need and then adjusting it to what you need. So the first one is this one. And then, of course, you can update the value to any color and the labels. So the label is what you'll see in the legend itself. Second one is an image control, which I showed you. You can add your logo or maybe a disclaimer or anything that you want to your map in any of the corners. It's called an image control. Then we have a label control, and a label really allows you to add some text somewhere, and usually is used for kind of like a copyright information or what year it was built in. Another one is the two that are kind of similar is the text control and the title control. I showed you the text control here in the bottom right corner. A title control that just shows a huge title at the top of your map. Then you can add a timeline control, which is similar to partial views, but timeline control is over years. So in this case, we're looking at quarters. But if my data has data in specific years, then I can just tell Kumu, okay, Kumu, I want a button for each of these years, and then I want the data to show up in accordance with the year that it was filled in the profile fields. Then the view toggle, which is exactly what you're seeing here. So to toggle between different partial views. And finally, the SNA dashboard. All of these are explained here. And like I said, for most controls, you just have a simple copy paste, and you only have to adjust some of the values, maybe, or the field names to represent your specific data. But you don't have to write any of the code yourself. It's just really easy copy paste. What an SNA dashboard does is it shows information about the map, like numerical information, and it updates as soon as you're filtering. So right now we're looking at the whole map, and you can see here in the bottom right corner, it says that this map has 147 elements, 502 connections. It shows the density, the reciprocity, and the average degree. And these are called metrics, and metrics are basically algorithms that are calculated based on a specific network. So it looks at how many elements there are, how many connections they are, but also how they are connected. For example, if there's two elements on opposite sides of the map, how do they eventually end up being connected through all the degrees that they're kind of going through in the network? And it can give you a little bit more information about the interconnectedness of your network, or who the influencers are in your network, who has the most control over information flow in the network, etc. And like I said, what's really neat about this is that it updates as soon as you use the controls. So if I now say, okay, I only want to see organizations with this specific certificate, then you can, that now I have 73 elements, a little less connections, and all these metrics are automatically calculated as well. So for your map, you can decide what you want to show in the SNA dashboard. You can also only show elements and connections, or only show density, or any of these. And again, how to really write that code is explained here in the dashboard control guide. Very straightforward, simple copy paste, and indicate which elements you want to show. So those are the different options. And just for a little bit more understanding around how the control code is built up and where you need to make changes, if you do want to make changes, I just want to show how that's created in the advanced editor. And one thing to remember is that these basic building blocks, I never write them out myself. I'm just explaining this to you now just for an understanding. But I always start a control simply by creating it in the basic editor, always. Even if I want to end up in the advanced editor, I'll first create it in the basic editor, because that will automatically already add the basic data here, and then I can start making updates. So yeah, don't make it hard for yourself. Use the basic editor first. So first, we call this an add controls block. So basically anything that goes after this opening bracket and after saying add controls is all about the controls that are going to show on your map. Because if I close this one, you can see that I don't have any controls information anymore. It just shows any of the other information in my map, like global settings for my map. So the first one is always add controls. You'll see that in the guide as well. Then the second line is always the region where you want the control to be. And again, any control that I put between the opening and the closing bracket of the region, it goes in that specific region. So here at the top, I can see that there's only one control, one filter control, which is correct. But in the top left, where if you remember here, there's just a lot of information, there's a lot of controls. So here I can see, okay, I have a showcase and I have a text control and I have a filter. So that's kind of how you can see, okay, which control do I want to change and where is it located, so that you make the right changes where you need them to be. So the third line is always what type of control it is. Like I said, it can be a filter here. It can be a text. It can be a showcase. It'll say cluster at some point. Yep, there. And the way you can always see what a control does. The target is what specific entity on the map am I targeting. So in this case, I'm targeting elements, but I can also say I want to target connections if I would have a map that has connections. I can also say I want to target only part of the data, so that you want the filter to apply to only data that adheres to this specific part of the data. So usually you do that by indicating a selector. What I could, for example, do is I want only element types that have XYZ as a value. I want the filter to only apply to them, so that the rest of the map will always remain visible, but any element that has element type XYZ will actually be hidden if you click on that button. With the selectors, there's, again, a lot of customization possible, because you can just decide what you want it to focus on. So then by is the field that I want to filter by. In this case, it's map template, but you can also see that I added a placeholder, and a placeholder is basically the name that you want to see. As is what you want it to look like. So this can just be a label. It can be a button. If I update this now, you'll see these are buttons, and I can also make it into a drop-down, which will then activate placeholder, and it'll just say map template without the little drop-down arrow. I'll revert. Then multiple is what I explained earlier, that if you want Kumu to allow you to activate multiple at the same time, in this case, no, so I say false, but it can also say true. And then the default is show all. So in this case, I want to show all of the data. But let's say that I actually want to only show one specific template when people open up the map. Then what I would do is simply list the option that I only want to show here. So out of all these options that I have here, let's say big data. And if I now click apply, then you see big data is being activated. It is showing that filter. And if I were now to refresh, we'll save the information and refresh the page, then every time that someone comes onto this map, it will only see big data. And then they actually have to click on the other options to see the rest of the data. So that's also good if sometimes you feel like, hey, I think I lost half of my map. Then sometimes you've changed the defaults to a specific name. So like I said, these are the basic things that you can do. And there's a lot of different property references. I'm not going to go through all of these today. All of these are explained here in the controls reference. So you can see what any of these does. You can add just so many things like by, and it's also, by the way, explained if you go to, for example, filter control in the documentation, advanced editor here, the supported properties, you'll see like target, everything that I just explained, you'll see here as well. So just good to always go back and forth between the docs and your Kumu map if you have any questions about how to do something. Okay, then I talked already about the built-in controls, but at the same time, I can also hide built-in controls like that. So right now I have a legend in the bottom right corner, but let's say that I don't want a legend in the bottom right corner. What I would then do, and this is actually explained here in the controls guide again, how to make things show up here, built-in controls. So let's say that I want to take the legend out because I don't like it. For the built-in controls, you won't see any code in the advanced editor. So you really need to add that yourself first. What I have to do first is create the region for the bottom left because the legend is in the bottom left. So I scroll down past the other regions, and here below bottom, I will write bottom left. And instead of writing code inside of this block, I'm going to close it immediately, basically saying I don't want anything in the bottom left. I just want white space. So now if I click apply, you'll see that the legend was taken out here. Okay, I have one question. I have controls in the top right of the map. I added the search control above the custom controls, but it doesn't show up. Do you know why? Okay, great question, because that's exactly what we did here. Usually, if it doesn't show up, it might be because any of the syntax is not exactly correct and Kumu doesn't understand it. So usually, if you place controls in the top left corner, this search bar here, which is a built-in control, goes away. So let's say that I just put in this information. Then you can see that search is now gone. So what I want to do, if I want to keep showing that search, then I need to bring it back in, which I can do by clicking revert. And yeah, this is how you add it back in. So you just say search, and then you have the opening and the closing bracket right away because there's no other code that I need inside of my search. And if it's not working right now, then there's a couple of things to look at. The first one is to make sure that there's, for example, a space between search and this bracket. It sounds so minor, but it actually happens sometimes that people forget a space. Make sure that you have the opening and the closing brackets, and then make sure that it is within the brackets of the region where you want it to be. So the built-in controls do have specific regions where they need to exist. You can't interchange them. If you would switch this over to top left, then it probably works.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Something else that I wanted to explain is something we refer to as children of a control, because when you create your controls, you can find it here, regions, children, here. Usually when you create a control, it shows all the available options for that specific field. Because remember here at the top, we're creating a control by map template, and it shows all the possible options that I have in the field map template in any of my elements. So it shows all of the options. Sometimes I want to have more specific selections. Let's say that I want to only show a couple of them, or I want them to be hyper-specific, only looking at part of the data that has as a condition, like I only want to show it if it has this information. And then you would have to build each of the options. So right now it says big data, causal loop, custom, etc. You would have to build all of them by hand. Okay, so what you would do then is you create different options, we call them. So here there's one option and there's two options. So basically this would be a control with two different buttons. First button will say people, and it will only focus on elements that have an element type of person. And I happen to know this because I know what this selector does, but maybe normally you would type this out a little bit more. So it would say like element type is person. But in this case, this is like a Kumu shortcut. And the second control button would say orgs. and it would only focus on elements that have the element type organization. And right now you're only seeing 2, but it can really be as many different options as necessary. You can just create as many different options as you would want, and it allows you just to control much more what you're going to see on the map as soon as you click a button. Yeah, so you would no longer be focusing on by tags, so that is taken out, but you would only be focusing on the specific options. So the code gets changed a little bit. There's not the basic options anymore. Sorry, the basic properties anymore. You just see option 1 and option 2. Again, everything is explained here. If you do feel like this is a little bit overwhelming because you do have to actually write out each option yourself, then you can always send us a message at support@kumu.io, and we'll be happy to build it for you, or send one example that you can copy then for your other options. Because yeah, this might be a little bit more advanced. It took me quite some time to actually figure out what this does and how it works. Other one is groups, and I showed you an example already, but groups basically, sorry, back up. Normally, if you create controls, they all show on a different line. As you can see, there's a vertical list of all of the different controls. In this case, this is one specific control, so it shows all the options on one line. But what if I want to have different controls, but I do want them all on the same line? So multiple dropdowns. This is what they've done here. So there's a dropdown here, and then there's a dropdown here, and that's done through grouping. Again, the code is here. Might look a little bit overwhelming, but yeah, try it out. If you don't get anywhere, just simply send us a message. The only property, it allows you to, let's say that I have all these different options, but I actually don't want the viewer to be playing around with all these different options. I just want them to show certain ones. So in that case, I would create a property. So I would create a new line, and I would say only, as in only show systems and stakeholder, and then a comma, and then another opening bracket, and opening quote and closing quote, and I would say systems. So now you can see that there's only 2 options. Even though there's way more options available in the data, I'm only showing these 2 because maybe these 2 are the most relevant, or the ones that I want my viewer to see. So that's one way to use only. Another way to use only is to change the order of the controls, because maybe I want them to be ordered in order of importance to me, and I want to convey that to my viewers. So what I do here is I click only, and then I say systems, and then I want to show stakeholder, and then I want to show big data. Well, I need to make sure that I'm closing big data. And as soon as I apply, you can see now that that's the exact order that my controls are in. And this works for buttons, but also dropdowns or any of the other options. It's good to always keep in your back pocket. I get this question quite often. How do you show only parts of the options? Okay, another thing that I really like about controls is that you can also create a on-off toggle. This is the same as the one that I showed you here. So if I click here, it only shows the elements that have a presentation. And as soon as I unselect it, then it brings all of the data back. What I also really like to use it for is, for example, connections. So I'm going to show you how I would do that. So first, let's bring some connections in because there are no connections yet. So I would say cluster. That brings in all the creators, and now there's connections. And I will go find this specific control. It's in the bottom right corner, so I already know that I need to look for bottom right here. And this is an example of an option. So basically a child, the children are the options of the control. And the first one says the target. So I want to only target, previously I only wanted to target any elements that had the presentation tag in its profile, because I had indicated in the data which elements or which Kumu projects were presentation. And then I wanted to focus only on that specific information. The selector is basically like what entities do you want the control to select. In this case, it's an asterisk because I want it to apply universally to all the entities. The default is true. So by default, I want to show all of the information, and only if I click on it, it goes away. And then the label. So now if I want to change this to the target, like I said, I want to be able to toggle connections on and off. So what I would do is the target would simply be connection. Kumu knows what a connection is. And then I want to change the label to show hide connection. So now if I click apply, you can see that this specific control is updated. And if I click, okay, Kumu is rearranging itself. Hurry up. Yes. If I click on it, it suddenly takes away all of the connections. You can still see the creators. You can still see the elements. You just can't see how it is connected. So in this case, it's not a very useful view, but I do want to show you how that's done. And this can really be done for anything, just any data that you want to like bring in and out of the map with a simple click of a button. You can create like this. Okay, then lastly, the partial views control. It was done here, like I explained a little bit earlier in the call. Partial views is created by simply creating one view for each of the specific views that you would like to see simply by clicking on the controls at the top. What you do is after you've created each view, you would copy over that code into the main view and then give it a label. How to do that exactly is explained in the partial views guide. I'm only going to show you how to add the control at the top. So let's say that I would have all of the different orders here as a separate field. And you can see here in my data that I have the first partial view and the second partial view. Let me just close all of these code blocks. So you can see here now that these controls at the top, they correspond with what you see here. And then all I had to do was simply add the view toggle control and not what I want it to look like here at the top. Again, this is in our documentation. You can just copy paste it over right away. It was already done for me. And you can see here that you can style it again as the buttons or as a drop down or any of the options available. So that makes it really easy to go through different views. And actually, if you remember this map from the beginning, this here on the bottom left is actually a partial view because it allows you to switch colors. Normally, the control, like the basic control, would only allow you to filter or hide or showcase or cluster. But as soon as you see when clicking on a control button, you see a difference in colors or you see a difference in layouts entirely, that is done by partial views. This is also a partial view. And again, this is the on-off button. So basically I can just switch it on and switch it off. The last thing I wanted to go into is how to decorate controls. You don't really see much coloring of the controls. Like I said before, you can choose between labels, buttons, drop downs, but what you can also do is color or change the font or the size or any of those things. Let me just try to do that here in the top left. So the first thing that you can see here is the text control that I have here. Switch it up. The text control that I have here, the value is what I see on the map. So search by. And in this case, the font weight, I changed it to bold because I want that to be highlighted a little bit more. But of course, I can also change this to italic and this is not a combination. I think it's font style. Yeah. Okay. So now you can see that this changed. It went from bold to what it is now. I can also indicate the font size. So right now it's set to 13, but I can of course also set it to 30. Oh, and that would make it a lot larger. So you can play around with that. And finally, what I don't see used a lot, but technically it's possible, is the coloring. So you can say, I want it to be colored red, or I want the background color, if you want it to be really flashy, I want it to be yellow. That's how you can kind of decorate it a little bit. Same goes for this one here at the top. You can use simple colors, just like writing out red, blue, yellow, etc. Or you can also use a hex code, which is basically a code of letters and numbers, and that changes to a specific color. So that's how you can kind of decorate it. And you can also work with padding. So if you want to create a bit more space, what you can see here below project name and filter by, there's a bit more space. And I added that here. So the margin at the bottom, 15. If I would change this to 50, then you can see that there's a lot more space between these controls here. So that's how you can kind of play around with all of these. Again, all of this information is in the property reference, background color, font family. You can change font size, style, weight, height, margin, any of these things. Opacity can be adjusted so that sometimes you might want to use it for your branding or to really make a control stand out. That is basically what controls are all about. I would love to hear if there's any questions or if anyone wants to pull up their map and to go through a specific example. Let me know if there's anything I can help with.